May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. My friends, I am so excited to think and feel with you about the time when Jesus got the big picture, and those times when you and I have our visions expanded. I'm pretty sure that everyone watching and listening has had at least one time in their life when someone said something or did something that invited you or challenged you to realize that your worldview is on the small side. My life has been marked by a series of those stretching events. One of the reasons I love Jesus so much is that he was human in every way that we are. This morning is a great example. Today's gospel story reminds us that even Jesus realized in this morning's event that his world was too small. It was too restrictive, that it was not yet God-sized, or it was not yet a big love perspective. Since God is alive in you right now, God is calling you and me right this moment to see if there are places where, in forms of race or gender or sexual orientation or attitudes about immigrants or poor people or folks who live on the streets, that our perspectives and actions could be more God-sized. In the story, a non-Jewish woman, a Canaanite or Syrophoenician woman, challenged Jesus and persisted in the face of Jesus' ignoring her, dismissing her, demeaning her, even being rude to her, when he compared this woman and her daughter to dogs. This woman from another category of humanity opened Jesus' worldview in response, opened Jesus' eyes, expanded Jesus' horizons about who is in, who needs your compassion, who is part of your and God's whole. W-H-O-L-E. This woman was outside Jesus' Jewish community, an other. A person Jesus had not understood was someone Jesus was sent into the world to treat as an equal to himself. And Elizabeth Schall's-Caffey said in her sermon on this story 3 years ago, Jesus' initial response is painful, is not merciful. He is silent, dismissive, insulting. And this woman persists in petitioning even as her deepest pain is being cast aside as nothing. This woman carries on, presenting her argument as to why he should intercede and relieve her daughter of the demon. She will not be cast aside. She's faithful. She's persistent. As Jesus and the Canaanite woman remain engaged with one another, great faith is confessed. Jesus' heart is transformed. His mind is changed. And merciful compassion prevails. Close quote. This nameless woman's faithfulness and greatness are revealed this morning, and Jesus' greatness and faithfulness are revealed, and a child is healed. In a few weeks, our forum guest will be the famous process theologian and philosopher, John Cobb. We've already videotaped the forum conversation. It'll air in early September, and Professor Cobb, out of the blue, specifically pointed to this morning's story to illustrate that Jesus was not an individual separate from the intellectual and religious ecosystem in which he was born and raised. He was indeed the product of his community, but not only of the rabbinic community of Jesus' Judaism. Professor Cobb says it's precisely that Jesus' openness, his willingness to be taught by a Syrophoenician woman, is an example of that. That shows greatness, Dr. Cobb said. You don't show greatness by just sticking to what you've always believed. You see, prior to being challenged by the persistent faithfulness of this outsider woman, Jesus was a closed system thinker about who was to benefit from his ministry and his life. And this woman challenged him in the face of his dismissing her, Jesus rudely insulting her. And he opened up. Dr. Cobb went on to say that in this interview that scholars can trace almost everything in this interview that we've already taped, that we're going to see in September. He said that scholars can trace almost everything Jesus said back to other rabbis and biblical passages, with the possible exception of Jesus' thrilling and luminous teaching in the Sermon on the Mount about love. He said, in order to be authentic God love or big love, love must be for your enemies, or as Dr. Cobb said, your opponents. When we talk about loving others, they do not have to be people who are like ourselves. If there's a unique teaching of Jesus, it is that yes, we are to love our neighbor, but what is emphasized is that we love our enemies and our opponents and those who do us harm. Very strong opposition calls forth our love, as Jim Lawson teaches in another forum video that's coming up next Sunday. And we are not to be indifferent to anybody. We cannot and do not close ourselves off from anyone. And I want to rush to add that the power of Christ is living and pulsing inside every one of us, you and me, right now. I feel it in this place this morning. That power of Christ's life and Christ's love. It is ready to expand our circle of care and compassion to absolutely the widest possible community, both of persons and of the creation. And when you and I open our embrace to include everyone and everything, healing results, just like in this gospel story. But too often, but thank God, God provides. It takes a brave, courageous, passionate person persisting in inviting us, oftentimes in the form of a challenge from someone who is other from us, courageously to get in our face. So let me tell you about my life. One of the most recent events of transformation and stretching me to be more inclusive took place during a staff meeting in my former church. It was during the staff meeting where we were sharing what we knew about the visitors and newcomers so that each staff member could greet everyone with warm, welcoming familiarity. We were talking about a new family, and I insensitively and rudely, I judge myself now with new eyes. I said, can someone tell me whether that young person is a girl or a boy? I wince with embarrassment to confess this now. A very brave colleague said to me, Ed, I would like to invite you to consider that not every person, and in fact not any of us, is solidly one gender or another. And her saying that was not enough for her. She went on with gentle, penetrating passion. Ed, there is such a thing as gender fluidity and our siblings in the human family. Now, that was a great move on her part. taking an oft-repeated phrase of mine that God and our church are in the business of turning the human race into the human family. She said, our siblings in the human family, particularly our transgender siblings, frequently prefer to be referred to with personal pronouns of they, them, and theirs, not he or her. Y'all, immediately, my mind apprehended what my conscience already knew. She was right. I was silent. I later learned that there is a health consequence to appreciating and attending to and acting on what my colleague challenged me about and invited me into a larger picture of love. I recently read a report that said when a transgender youth chooses a new name, it's important for friends, relatives, and acquaintances to use that chosen name. This is a new study. For those who selected a different name from the one given at birth, being called by the chosen name in the study reduced depressive symptoms and overall suicidal risk. Researchers found the reduction in mental health risks was strongest when the chosen name was used in multiple contexts, like at home, at school, at work, and among friends. Look at what happens in the uptick of health and wholeness quotients when people who happen to have white skin can say with deep commitment that Black lives matter. Look at what happened when Jesus heard this Syrophoenician woman tell him that her daughter was sick and that he could heal her if he would just believe that Syrophoenician lives matter. Jesus did. That was his greatness. He opened his system, and the little girl was healed. Racism and sexism and bigotry against LGBTQ siblings are public health issues. And St. Luke's Church knows it. To be a part of this faith community is to be constantly challenged and invited to be a part of Jesus and God's mission to heal us all and make us one, as this morning's psalm said. Look at what happens when more and more people listen to science and wear masks and take other mitigations, not just for themselves, but for everyone else. This pandemic is a portal, as Arundhati Roy says. Pandemic as a portal to understanding that health comes from our realizing with our mind what our consciences already know, that no part can flourish if another part is being destroyed or underserved, and all parts benefit as a whole. This is the law of the universe, my friends. It is the only recipe. Understanding this wholeness, it is the only recipe for outlasting the coronavirus pandemic. So let us not drag the dead carcasses of bigotry and anti-scientific hyper-individualism into our post-pandemic life. Let us hear the call of the Syrophoenician woman that those on the margins' lives matter, and let us activate the greatness of Jesus that pulses inside each of us to see that we all of creation, live in one ecosystem, and that we depend on one another for our health and wholeness. We are moving, my friends, this very moment into a new civilization, and the longer we hold on to our outdated tribal and polarized categories of care, the longer it will take us to enter through the portal into God's new world. And this church is committed to it. We are facing potentially $160,000 shortfall because of this pandemic. And I have been appealing in the last 3 Sundays. And we have had an amazing outpouring of generosity. More than $66,000 have come in already, and all of us are doing cuts here and there in programming, etc. And I'm trying to keep from there being any cuts to any salaries. You are a part of that. You are part of the whole. Please open your hearts to this wholeness-based, radically inclusive healthcare community. Give and be a part of God's solution and a part of our moving into God's new universe. Amen.